opposite of safe by screen, John.
Deb, how are you doing?
How are you?
Meditate. I just stare
Hey.
peacefully off into
Who
space.
is-
Trying to call me.
Not like it should be.
Nah.
It's been a couple weeks.
Well, Kevin is calling up the. Sorry.
Get out of the executive session.
Oh, sorry.
Out at 6:53. Sorry.
Well, Kevin. Oh, now that Kevin has them, he did that on purpose. So, again, a little reminder that we're in uncharted territory. We don't typically have this many guests at a work session. So what we hope to achieve tonight is to talk about what we want to accomplish in the work session, how the norms are for a group this size. We're going to have a few minutes and discuss the feedback we got from 1119, which I sent in the email you would have received from me, a link to reading that feedback. Kevin will talk about school finances and give sort of an overview. And if you've heard him talk in any forum, that'll be a review for you. But if you haven't heard him, it'll just give everyone a chance to be on level playing field. And then that next sort of section with 5-year forecasts and those opportunities, that's when a real opportunity for discussion happens. But truly, anytime something comes up and you need a question or clarification, just sort of speak up. We don't normally raise our hands like a classroom, but again, since there's so many of us, just sort of interject. So we'll figure it out. We'll find a rhythm to it. So that's our plan for this evening. So the objectives for this work session are, next slide. I can't switch slides. Next page. We did not rehearse our Pat Sajak and Vanna White. The objectives are to help the Board of Education determine whether a March operating levy is feasible. If it is feasible, to help determine what combination of millage and cuts would be supported in the community. And if it is not feasible, start a discussion of what work would need to happen between now and August/November. So those are the objectives for tonight, and we'll keep coming back to that about whether that discussion is impacting our ability to inform the board around March or not. And if it's not about informing March, then we'll try to move away from that topic. Some of the norms that we'll talk about, but feel free to add any of these if there's something that you need to make yourself comfortable to participate. In addition to these, or if there's something up here you're uncomfortable with, now would be a good time to speak up. But a norm for the group will be to stay focused on the objectives. That is a challenge that we have at board work sessions in general, is making sure that we accomplish the work that we set out to, that we don't get down on the paths because it's an evening, and while we like each other's company, sometimes we forget how late it's getting. So that is, we hold ourselves accountable we try to hold ourselves accountable to stay on the objectives. I encourage you to listen to understand. In big groups like this, and when topics are challenging, many times we listen, or while someone's talking, we're thinking about what we're going to say next, rather than listening to understand the person who's speaking. So I encourage you to listen to learn some new things tonight. We encourage you to be in a stance of seeking solutions and being open to solutions of others, hopefully for some creativity, and to be critical of ideas and not people. Are there other things that anyone would like to add to that? Hearing none,
Nope.
we'll move on. Okay, so we want to just take 10 short minutes tonight to operationalize a little bit around the feedback that we heard on the 19th. So if you could take just a few minutes, I'm sure that you've probably already done this in your head if you've read that, but to think about what are some of those big ideas that you heard or that you read in the feedback from the 19th. And each idea, put it on a separate Post-it note. So, for instance, I would take one if I had a Post-it note and say, thank you, I have a whole bag of them.
You have them too.
Say one of the things that I heard loud and clear was the number was too large. So I'm writing too large on one of my Post-it notes. Right? And then you're going to write whatever the things that you heard What were the reasons that you voted yes, no, whatever the things read in there? Start to write those down. Just do that on your own, each idea on a separate Post-it note. I'm giving you 2 minutes for it. It's like a classroom activity. 2 minutes, just start writing them down, one on each separate Post-it note. Ultimately, no one else has to read these. Like, so your handwriting is, like, you're gonna be in charge of reading your own words. So 2 minutes, go.
Oh, of course.
You have a little stack of Post-it notes in front of you in a minute. About 30 more seconds. All right, finish your thought. Then with the people near you, start to gather them together in like ideas. So if I'm here with John and Victoria and Michael, I'm gonna say, I had one that was said too large. Anyone else have that? Great. So we're gonna start making a little pile of too large. So start, put them in piles that make sense.
I feel like you're not
Play with you.
Okay, I have vague. Wait, here's 2 vagues.
Yeah.
And
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're good, you're good.
Baker.
I had that one, like getting insurance, yeah.
then transparency. I have wants.
Right, right.
So needs versus wants.
Transparency,
Yeah.
lack of communication.
Okay, yeah, sure, because that could be a want. Yeah, you're right.
That was 4.
That was 4. People from
Yeah, it does a little bit.
Because they felt like they were speaking to
Transparency.
Yeah, no,
Distrust, was it distrust?
I just feel like it's
Two different. I have with that one.
So I had, people were unsure exactly.
that was like why people
Trust.
trust.
I did have some people that voted yes, though. I have safety, children, and future voted yes. 2
I had like an
Okay.
Here's
Confusing with that, but what does that mean? Where's
But
the?
yes,
meaning that people just
like blindly supported.
the way it was almost the way it was.
Anger would go with distrust, probably.
Confusing, 9-year-old, too skeptical.
I read a lot of
The
general
execution around
ignorance of
how
school
These were
funding.
guesses, though, they're kind of in their own mouth. So that's some G.
Where would I feel like that was.
Feel like you
I think that would go with trust, right? If it's scare tactic, they're not.
feel like you're getting, like you kind of got some stacks?
Sure.
Yeah. Transparency.
You guys getting
One of
close?
said
You need a little more
vague, so maybe
time?
I'd go with transparency.
Do you guys want to join some of ours? Do you have anything about the mistrust?
I have a too
Or
much.
like being lied to
That
or?
we don't have.
Okay. Too many ones
Too much
versus
would be the
needs.
shock. We've got that one. Okay. Stack it up.
I read a couple
like
biting
land.
comment about special needs kids.
No, but I
And
agree.
Yeah.
that's getting more expensive. And
So Whitney
Would
was
that
okay.
match
It's very
with
interesting
to build on
perspective.
land
Bill.
at
And he
current
goes,
schools instead
I
of
have more
buying
than
the
you.
land?
And his
Or
big stuff,
I
right?
guess
I go, that's
it's the
because I have
land
double sided.
plan.
And then
Alright,
Tammy
first
pulls
you
up
finish
one
up
half
your
and I goes like that.
It's either one.
So here's how we're gonna try and gather the big ideas. I'll start, because you guys are still working. I'll start over here and ask this group to give me one of their big categories. And if that sort of captures yours, you're gonna move that off to the side. And then we'll go around. And then if someone goes, I think that category's maybe not quite named exactly right.
Oh, I want to land it upside down. Was it a good one? Do we want to keep it? Yeah, a little bit.
Okay.
Just creeps.
Alright, so what did you guys start with over here? What was one of yours?
Too many needs versus wants. Or wants versus needs, I guess I should say.
Okay.
Touch base with me for starting.
That's one of ours.
Said your handwriting didn't matter, but mine kinda does.
Wants versus needs.
Next group?
We had unsure about where the money was going, financial responsibility, transparency.
Okay. Next group?
We talked about the suddenness and the impact, both on the city, financial impact on our property.
Okay.
Land need versus existing land, Grailville, sort of combined in this.
Let's call it land.
Hmm?
Let's call it land.
Land.
Next group?
Master plan.
Can you be more specific?
I can be very specific if you want me to be.
Yeah.
No, I'm not trying to, we did a Pareto analysis of the, and I'm not trying to take this thing over, but, so we had the driver reasons of 266 feedback she got at the meeting last week, for master plan economics and cost and board of, election trust and time. That was 84% of the responses she got last week.
So what I was kind of hoping for, like I think, I mean, I did something similar. The idea sort of was to operationalize that globally, so you wanna just pick one of these up here that's different.
You got master plan up there?
Well, I see land, and I see wants over needs.
I don't know about just people, but this was the number one item that people voted no.
Reference to master plan. And I think some people reference maybe.
Might be communications, it might
What's
be
the
cost,
plan?
it might be everything, but it's just.
So financial impact is cost. I heard trust, clarity, transparent. Should I put trust here with this one?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Next group,
Safety or conflict,
what does that mean?
families would have to move.
That was a big one.
Too much.
So financial impact, that, around that? Okay.
Need to use a different color.
A need for people voted yes because there was a need for future buildings. And so far we're identifying those, but.
Doesn't one say needs
Dr.
versus wants?
Kraus, could you use a different color because it's really impossible to read that?
I sure can.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Isn't the first one needs versus wants?
Yeah, the first
she's
one's
gonna
wants versus needs.
Well, I read that wants versus needs. And for me, I would say wants versus needs when I read it, like that, some of the athletic things I questioned, but I did read a theme of people wanting a payment for. Yeah, I'm saying something different. Wants versus needs, that's how
I think you're saying there's a need for more space. I think maybe like that. Like people are realizing there's a need for space in our,
But it's really,
we have a lack of
what
space.
you really need,
So I'm
what
just,
you want, but not
talking about
necessarily
things
need.
that I saw show up. And so one of the things that I saw show up was that people voted yes because of that, what they identified as a need for space.
Next group?
One of the yes reasons that we felt we saw was a desire to support teachers and support programs at the schools.
anything that your things don't fit under? This isn't anything scientific, it's just sort of to guide us.
We didn't say that, did we?
It was too large and too long.
Oh, I
That
didn't
up
see
there.
Say it again?
Like too large of an amount, for too long of a time.
So
That's
financial
true.
impact?
Probably, yeah.
maybe? Okay. Going around?
We kind of saw a trend of people were saying they weren't getting clear answers. They weren't getting their questions answered clearly. Which might go
Okay.
with transparency.
Next group, anything new?
Ours were all covered.
Go ahead.
Scare tactics.
Safety being one.
Like the time analysis
They
for
said
the final
financial impact.
resolution, so once everything came
So
down,
too large.
that timeframe was too short.
Say it again, Tammy.
The time to analyze the final resolution that came out in July to vote, that timing was too short for people to comprehend and like really understand what was going on.
I heard sudden earlier and time, timing. Okay. Right. So the idea there is to just think about, this was feedback about what, you know, where was that miss, or where were opportunities, not opportunities, where were ideas that most people heard were misses, that we wanna make sure we take into account in making any decisions about recommendations for March and November. So we don't wanna go down one path and then realize that we're setting ourselves up for one of these major hurdles again. Does that make sense? All right, so that's just a quick reminder of where we were on the 19th. And then the other part that we want to remind everyone about before we get into the analysis is the next slide. Is the purpose, and this sort of gets to some of the feedback about supporting teachers in schools, which I heard anecdotally throughout the campaign. Is the purpose that we have is the goal is to improve student outcomes in schools. That's the work that we do. So we have a Board of Education that makes policy, that makes decisions and guides the district and guides the work that we do through a vision and a mission. And the vision of the school district for a long time has been to prepare students for tomorrow, today. And that mission and the work that the board drives their decision and their expectations forward is around growth, care, and innovation. You have a copy in your folder of the district expectations and the work that the board did to direct the administrative team on developing, the next slide, developing our school improvement plans. So the board develops these expectations and said, this is what we want to have happen in our school district. This is what we're gonna hold you accountable for. It's how I'm evaluated, it's the evaluations that we use for the administrators in the buildings to implement district and building improvement plans around student growth and increasing opportunities for kids, raising student achievement measures, increasing opportunities for College Credit Plus, career pathways, creating time for intervention in the day, and recruiting and retaining the highest quality educators and administrators that we can find. Around care, it's about addressing mental health needs and looking for programs around mental health needs. It's about increasing safety, safety fixtures, adding school resource officers, things like that, making systematic improvements and working with local law enforcement. And then around innovation, how do we partner with other school districts? How do we learn from the way other school districts do business? How do small groups of school districts work together to create something bigger? Developing maker spaces and opportunities for kids to build things in schools, and empowering teachers and students who are early adopters to be leaders in technology and part of our Loveland X team, so that they're piloting and pushing us forward in order to address that mission. And so when we talk about And then we worked this last year to develop Portrait of a Tiger. You have a copy of that. That's really trying to put some meat on the bones of what we would like the student experience to be. So when we talk about, when we make decisions on our side, and when we make our decisions about priorities and how we do business, it's always related to our building and our district goals and outcomes. And then Kevin is responsible for making sure that we budget for those things and we work through our 5-year forecast. But that's the work we do ongoing all of the time, and then provide updates to the board and they, to hold us accountable for that. So while we're remembering these things, this is where our big miss was in November, this is where our big hit is. This is where we're doing really well, where we have great teachers, where we have great programs, where we've shown great improvements over the last few years. So how do we make decisions moving forward that we don't miss, but that we also don't go backwards here? How do we find that balance? So those are those big ideas that we have in the room in order to help us make decisions and understand how we do all of our work on an ongoing basis. Any questions about that?
Yeah, I have a question, sorry. So as you look at this, where would the board's position be on where you have gaps? Because I would imagine that's what led into the formation of what the plan was. So if this is the lighthouse vision, there was a gap versus this, okay? And so
from the operating standpoint, that would be looking at the additional teachers each year. So in the past, that's where we've been adding programs at the high school.
Okay.
So, one of the gaps at the elementary level is class size, but we're out of space. So that then led into that master plan, and that's the connection there. So the gaps in the past have been looking at the state report card, making sure kids had access to high-level courses, making sure there was interventions in place for students who are lacking behind, making sure that we were offering new and different digital arts instead of just traditional arts and those kinds of things. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
All right, so we're gonna hop into a lot of different discussions here. Can you hear me over there? Please throw something at me if you can.
He doesn't mean that.
So anyway, so the timeline of discussions and potential actions. So what we're in the process of doing is trying to determine a March versus November ballot issue. And this is just some information to keep in the back of your minds that's incredibly important because there are some deadlines that is required of us. Today's meeting is talking about operating fund needs. We have a meeting a week from today, which again you all will be involved in, and that is determining some permanent improvement needs, including the property. So we are not going to talk specifically today about the property. We will talk about that a week from today. We're going to focus a little bit more on operations currently. So 2 weeks from today, if we are going to go on the ballot in March, what is required is what's called a resolution of necessity. So a resolution of necessity is stating the millage amount, and that would be put to Hamilton County Auditor, and what they would do is they would certify the amounts. So the reason why there's a week in between is because they need some time to certify the amounts. I have confirmed with their staff that they will not be on vacation that week, so we should be good for that time frame. And then the 17th is basically just taking what they've given back to us and a resolution for us. The reason why that's important is because December 18th is the deadline to be on the ballot in March. It has to be to the Board of Elections down in Norwood by end of business on the 18th. So these are very important deadlines. One thing that's also important to be aware of, and we'll bring this up multiple times, is the levy is passed in 2020. The first time that the school district will receive funds is January of 2021. So January of 21 is the first new collection for property taxes. So what I'm going to hop into is an overview of school funding. Again, as Amy said, this is some stuff that we've talked about through this whole process. So some of you might be review, for others it may be new information and not no better time to kind of look at this again. So I'm gonna go over this really quickly on this part, because we're gonna dive deeper into these specific areas. There's three primary areas of total revenues in the district. State funding is roughly 32%. So state funding is what's called guaranteed from the state of Ohio. Again, we will hop into what that actually really means specifically. And that line item is flat funded. The second one is local funding. So that is local property taxes. That's 58% of the total budget, the total revenue portion. And that as well is flat funded. And the largest remaining portion is federal funding. We will not go into a lot of detail on this because it's not very much. And specifically the reason we won't go into it is because when you receive federal funds from grants, they are for specific areas in the district. So our two largest grants are IDAB, which is special education funding, and Title I, which is
Idea B and Title I federal funding. So those show up as expenses as well. So then there's an offsetting amount for those? Well, for example, in 2019, 178,000 was Idea Part B Instruction Curriculum Development Professional, for example, right? Which was the first year that showed up, 178,000. Was there an income then of 178,000 that offset that expenditure?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what happens, and we'll talk about it in more detail. So this is total revenue. When you talk about the operating account, it's just one particular fund. It's our largest fund. It really runs the district. When you look at these, there's a separate fund number. So we do fund accounting. There's a separate fund. You spend the money, and then you get reimbursed from the federal government. But it doesn't get receipted into the general fund. It gets receipted back to take care of those expenses that you're talking about.
Okay.
Did that make?
So from the general fund is 01, for example, in the coding, right?
Yeah.
So what is the federal funding code?
IDIB is 516.
Thank you.
Title I is 572. So these are for specific items, and they have to be used during the fiscal year. So there's not necessarily a way to hold on to the funds to do something in the future. You really have to use them that year specifically. So there's a lot of information on the Ohio Department of Education if you're interested in looking at that more. But what we're going to jump into are those two largest items. The first is state funding. So we are what's called a guaranteed district. So in the state of Ohio, there's up to 610 school districts. What happens is, from a state funding standpoint, you really want to be within the formula. So there's a formula for the state. Only about 100 school districts are on a formula. What you have is a guarantee, a formula, and then you have a cap. So there's districts on the cap guarantee, about 500 districts are on either one of those. So the reality is they're not on a formula. A guaranteed or a cap district basically receives the same amount they received the year before. So as a guaranteed school district, we receive the same amount of money the year before as we did the year before as we did the year before. For us to get off of the guarantee, we would have to add roughly 250 kids to our enrollment. So just getting to a place where we might receive more money from the state is a costly proposition, if you will. So you can see here, this is our actual numbers. These are the last 5 fiscal years. State funding has increased in the district by an average of 0.37% annually over the last 5 years. The bottom line with that is the state of Ohio continues to put the burden to fund school districts on local communities. Again, this is a flat funded source of revenue. So now local funding. So again, that is currently 58% of total revenue is property taxes. School districts cannot utilize sales tax. Income taxes can be used as an opportunity for school districts, but currently in Loveland, we have only property taxes. So the question oftentimes comes up, why levies? So first, as we already talked about, there's a lack of state funding. So that's flat funded, so we're not receiving anything more from the state. The second reason, and obviously the most important reason, is because what's called House Bill 920. So House Bill 920 was a piece of legislation that was passed in 1976. And what it does is the school district does not receive any more you personally, to see that, what you do is you look at your tax statement and see something called a rejection factor, and that's taking into account your home increasing in value over time. So this is actually looking at our financials and showing the effect of how it's going on 20. So district level property tax funding has decreased by an average of 0.12% in the last 4 years, while property values have actually increased by roughly 2.5%. You might ask, why the last 4 years? The reason why we have the last 4 years on there is because that's when the 2014 levy, the first year that it had full collection was in fiscal year 16. So since we've had full collections since the last levy, there's actually been a slight decrease. What you'll see here is this split in fiscal year 18. That would be prepayments on property taxes due to tax law changes. So what you can actually see is some prepayments in 18, and in 19, the amount is actually lower than what was in fiscal year 17. But basically, this is showing you that as home values increase in value, the school district is not receiving any more money from local property taxes. Again, that is flat budget. So now when we want to load all together, so this is our operating revenues, those two pieces. Revenue in the last 4 years has averaged 0.6% annually over the last 4 years. So again, given the available resources, available funding resources in the school district, revenue is basically flat since the last levy. And if you do look, we're talking about the forecast, but it's also forecasted to be flat going forward as well. So we're going to touch upon this a little bit more when we talk about the forecast, but this just gives you an idea of where our operating expenses go. So what you can see is roughly 83% of our operating expenses go towards salaries and benefits. So we're a people-heavy business, as we should be. But those are going to be naturally inflationary expenses with cost of living adjustments, negotiated agreements, and healthcare costs typically rising. So now we're just going to go into a basic example of the operating levy cycle. So when we're talking about an operating levy, we're talking about our general fund. So there's a question about that. Our general fund is the primary source of funds that we utilize to fund the district. The district determines what is the lowest cash level that we can continue to operate. I think it's comfortably that we can operate well. So that's a really important piece that we'll look at. And once the general fund runs low, a local levy passes to increase the balance, and this process repeats itself over time. So this is a general look at it as an example. So the green part is revenues, the red is expenses. What you'll see is, and we've already established that, and this isn't far from what we're dealing with, is we've already established that our revenue is flat and our expenses are increasing. Is what you can see is the flat revenue, the green, and then where it pivots as your spending exceeds your revenue is a levy. So the point of a levy is to create some space, a little bit of a surplus, and then it slowly goes away. Basically what you're trying to do is create time and space to be able to fund the district. It keeps going on. The thing that we're looking at right now is if this were the levy that just failed, basically this is being pushed out more. So the question comes up as to, if we're looking at an operating levy in March or November, why does that amount have to be larger? Well, we lost a year's worth of revenue, so the space is just grown larger to try to make that. So that's just that's a general example of how the levy cycle works. If you're interested in looking at how Loveland kind of compared to some of our neighbors, some more of this information, we'll have it up online with buildingtechnation.org. So, you all should have a 5-year forecast with you. It's the second to last page, if you're looking at 5-year forecast. I mean. Yeah, so it should be in your package. It should be a 5-year forecast. This will give you far more information than we'll talk about here, so if you have your time, I'm going to look through it. This is a lot of the assumptions that are in the forecast. A lot of previous data as well. But we're just going to talk about some of the general information in the 5-year forecast. So the state of Ohio requires school districts to do a 5-year forecast. It's on your general account, so it's on your main operating account. Despite the fact that we are required to do it, we use it as a living, breathing document. We budget out of it, we make decisions based on it, we look at it regularly. Even with that in mind, what you have in front of you is slightly different than what you would see if you go to the Ohio Department of Education's website. Some budgets have been changed slightly, so this is a much more updated version of what's online. So again, we use it, it's living, it's breathing, we look at it regularly. So when you're looking at it, it's actually income on page 2. But when we're looking at the 5-year forecast, cash reserves are declining to flat revenue. So increasing expenses, flat revenue. In fiscal year 19, so if you're unfamiliar with our fiscal years are the opposite of calendar year. Calendar year is January, December, obviously when we're selling business. July through June are fiscal years in the school district, so basically like a school year. So in fiscal year 19, which ended in June of 19, the district ran a deficit of $2.8 million. So again, when we were looking at that graph, we were below the expense line on the revenue portion. Currently, we're running a deficit of about $3.8 million for this fiscal year. So if you look at this, this is your actuals, and these are the projected numbers. As you can see, the cash reserve balance is slowly decreasing. Once it goes below 0, that means we do not have any money in the bank. So why is that important? One thing we want to look at here too as well is best practice would be 2 months worth of expenses in the district. 2 months worth of expenses in the district for $9 million. So what this is showing you is, this is actually last year's number, but this is for example purposes, is we typically see our money, we always receive property tax revenue twice a year. It's not throughout the full year. We typically, though, receive it in July and August. So what you see here in July and August, we receive the money from property taxes, and then it slowly starts to be eaten away. And then at the beginning of the next year, January, February, it's always in these really 3-month increments. But so you see a little bit of space, and then we start going down. Obviously, you see it below 0 because last year we were running a deficit. But this is what we're looking at, is the concern with the school, and I would think of it even in my own personal life, is if I'm trying to stretch things, and my concern is 30 to 60 days. If some of these payments are delayed 30 to 60 days, we would find it challenging to make payroll. So that's why 9 months, or $9 million worth of expenses is a healthy cash balance to have. But I would say that would be bare minimum when we're looking at this.
So, Kevin, I have a question. So in 2012, 13, and 14, your minimum was 9 million, but every year after that, it's been almost 10 million more than that. Why are you holding so much cash on hand if you only need 9 million?
Well, so if you're looking at our cash on hand at the end of the year, so we're talking about minimums.
12, 13, and 14 was 9 million. 15 was 13, 16 was 16, 17 was 19. 18 was 22.
So what you had a little bit different in there.
And it doesn't need to be exact, I'm just curious why such large discrepancies?
Yes, I mean, obviously, we can hear about that.
Yeah,
So
sure.
I ran some reports just to look at
You're fine.
generally what was going on. That, I know what I mentioned at your meeting was, my guess was that they actually had some potential revenue increases that were not necessarily, based on, property taxes. So, like, when you were forecasting out, they might have had some space that was being created. So if you look at 12 to 13, they had 5% increase in revenue, 3%, and then 15 is when some of the new levy was coming in. So if they were having increasing, I don't have that much increasing expenses. If they had slightly increasing expenses, they were able to make it up with some other revenue. Like right now, if you look at it from our perspective, is the 4% is a little bit skewed because of some extra money coming in. And we're looking at property taxes being paid forward. Right now, so, I mean, this is probably a simplification of it, but prior years, they had some revenue growth, so they had expenses increasing, but they had revenue potentially keeping up with it in those years. Right now, what we've got is we have a little bit of a different issue there. Where now we have expense increasing, but our revenue is basically flat. So they probably saw something that was really keep up with their expenses. And I can't necessarily speak exactly to them.
Yeah.
But I just know that the current situation that we're in right now is our revenues is not increasing, yet our expenses are. There's things that we can obviously do to look at that, but we cannot necessarily stop that they're going up, essentially.
Right.
I mean, that's what.
Well, I just think if you reduce cash on hand by $500,000 a year to get us back to the 9 million in 2012, 13, and 14, that reduces the amount you have to ask for in the operating levy.
Yeah, but then you have an opposite issue. So cash on hand is not necessarily, people might like it, it's not necessarily a savings account, it fuels everything that's happening in the district. So if you choose to not spend $500,000, we have to figure out a way to make it cut.
No, you can, I'm not saying don't spend it, I'm just saying spend it out of the cash on hand. I mean, right now you've got 19 million, and you used to only carry 9 million, so that's 10 million we've got as a buffer. Can't we use that instead of asking taxpayers to pay more?
Well, so, we're gonna have more.
Or am I not
conversation about-
understanding it right?
No. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of the opportunities that we might have, but at the same time, the way I would look at it is, we have to find an offsetting cost to do that. Because if this is a cycle that we're always looking at every 3, 4, 5 years, if I just spend more of that money, then the reality is that the levies are just gonna get bigger over time. So we're gonna have to find some sort of cost savings. If we don't wanna spend $500,000, we need to find a cost savings of $500,000.
Kevin, you're saying that that money is, even though it's cash, allocated.
I mean, so that's what the forecast would allocate essentially.
So you got the cash, but it's allocated to go somewhere against existing or future costs.
Exactly.
So if you cut 500,000, then you're short.
Cash on hand.
But now if you cut it from the
And
expenses,
the cash, you
then
have
it
to cut from the
balances.
expenses.
Yes.
So isn't it, Kevin, that you're saying, at the beginning of this fiscal year, for the operating account, we're at 15 million. We're projecting to go down to 11.2. With half a million expenses out, that would go to 11.8.
It would go down to 10.8, right?
10.8.
10.8. That's right.
What I would say is,
So Kevin,
I know.
just looking at this chart, we talk about 9 million cash balance, but this isn't showing cash balance. This is showing the difference between the income and expense by month, but not anything to do with cash balance. So
Right.
it's a little bit confusing for me initially, because I was looking at this saying, this doesn't register with all the numbers I've seen.
So that's what you need to say, so this, the information doesn't show cash balance, it
Right.
doesn't show what payments are coming in. So if we were in districts, that was 70% state funded, this would be far more flat,
Right.
because they paid out on a monthly basis. What I was just trying to show was why 2 months of expenses is a valuable number to be looking at, is because them delaying payment is not necessarily something that couldn't happen.
But to Lynn's point, June 19, right, where we show it's got a negative 2 million there, right? The end of 19 had a 15 million cash balance. So from a cash balance perspective, and when I was looking at prior years as well, June is a good proxy for your low point, because it's the end of your year, the new taxes haven't come in August, the new taxes haven't come in January, so, or have been spent from January. So June tends to be a fairly good proxy for the low point of the cash balance every year. So when I was looking at the cash balance then, June to June to June to June, those were the numbers that Juliet was referring to.
I understand what you guys are talking about. What I would just say is, if you're trying to find pulling $500,000 from cash on hand, I would say creates a separate issue, because it kind of starts snowballing over time. That if we want to create $500,000 in space, we have to find $500,000 in cuts.
Yeah.
I think a clearer chart is actually the prior page, where you have the cash, the June cash balances over time declining because the expenses outweigh the,
That's future.
are higher than the income.
In the past, they
Right,
went up.
but I think what they're saying is because the expenses are higher than the income, that cash balance is expected to go negative around fiscal year 2022 sometime, and that's what's driving the need for the levy, because they run out of money at that point.
And I think a key point is that it could be in December of that year that you're running out, just based on the cash flow at the beginning of the school year, and then declining and not popping up again.
Net income is not cash balance. They're related, but they're not the same thing. So he's saying we're running a negative, it's like you bring in 10,000 a month, but you're pushing out 12. That's not
yeah.
sustainable. That's all
Right.
it's saying.
Right.
It's not rocket science.
Right.
All right, so we're gonna dive, I'm sorry, any other questions? So we're gonna dive directly into, the expenses that you see on the forecast, so if you can go to that page 22. The expense part is the second portion, if you go from top to bottom, what the expense line items are. So salaries is roughly 61.5% of the operating budget. What drives that? It's obviously our staff. There's differentiated payments with our teaching, which is our certified staff, and our non-teaching staff, which is our classified staff. If you look at the assumptions that are currently in there, our certified staff, we're currently adding 2 teachers annually to improve student achievement. And the numbers that are driving it are 2% annual increases in base salary through the forecast, and a 2% annual increase in annual experience steps. If you're unfamiliar with schools, what the teachers, almost everybody is on is what's called a salary schedule. So every year that you have an extra year, you move up on the salary schedule. So that's what those experience steps are. So it's a combination of those two.
Is ridiculous.
If you go to the
Big
classified
4% year.
staff, again, it works the same way. It's 2.5% annual increases currently through fiscal year 21, and then 2% in base salary through the remaining years. Why that's important is because the negotiated agreement ends after fiscal year 20.
So the 2 teachers they're adding annually, roughly, what does a teacher cost? Just average.
$78,000 a year is the average
How
Loveland
much?
78 is the average Loveland teacher salary.
All in, including benefits?
No.
I don't need an exact number, just ballpark.
That's it, 78 without benefits.
So lower end teacher is roughly 81,000, higher end teacher all in roughly 107. staff, it's 2% annual increase in base salary and 1% experience increase. And if you go to the benefit side, so that's roughly 21% of our operating budget. 9% annual increases in healthcare are currently being put in from 21 to 24. Fiscal year 20 is 2.2%. That's an actual current number. The 9% matches our actuarial assumptions within our insurance consortium. One of the major risks that we run with that is many districts in the state of Ohio had an increase of 17 or 26% in fiscal year 20. I didn't say 17 to 26, it was 17 or 26% in fiscal year 20. So we were fortunate in that case, but it doesn't necessarily mean that could not happen in our workplace. So purchase services, so that's the third one down. It's roughly 11% of our operating budget. The forecast is increases of 1 to 4% depending on the specific line item. The largest pieces of purchase services are special education related costs. So in fiscal year 19, that made up 45% of our purchase services budget. Utilities were 17%, and students utilizing open enrollment in charter schools were 7%. Special education, as we just said, is a bulk of these items and has been increasing by 6.2% annually over the last 3 years. So one thing that has been talked about are expenses for the master planning of facilities, and these were no longer forecasted in the forecast that you have, nor the forecast that was on September's. Were legal fees, so the specific legal fees that took place during that process were $7,547. The architect/assessments that were done were about $250,000. We did an appraisal for the land, which is $3,000, and we also did a survey of $13,094. So the supply side is about 4.5% of the operating budget. Again, it's about 2 to 5% depending on which specific line item we're talking about. Textbooks are specifically purchased in this line item. The largest areas are general supplies, which are 48%, and transportation supplies, which are 26% of supplies. The next item, when you're going down top of time, is capital outlay. It's roughly 0.7% of the total operating budget. This is any item that has longer than 5-year useful life. Many of these items are purchased currently in our permanent improvement fund. We currently just forecast in a $300,000 budget just in case there's any major items that are needed in case something happens. And then lastly is other objects. It's 1.13% of the operating budget. Again, it's 0 to 2% based on the line item. The largest line item that is charged is auditor fees for the collection of taxes. 63% of the other objects line item. So this is just to give you a quick general look at, these are the forecasted line items by percentage increase for the next 5 years. The black line is the average increase for all expenses. And what you can see is the ones that are driving percentages. So the ones that are driving percentages are salaries and benefits and capital outlay. At the same time, salaries and benefits make up 83% of the total budget. Capital outlay makes up 0.7% of the total budget. So the reality is what's driving percentage are these two in particular.
Kevin, could I ask a question on the purchase services? Number one, I thank you for the history and the background. So I just looked at the 400 series numbers, right, and summed them up, and basically from 17 to 19, there was a $1.2 million increase in purchase services, right? And so when we talk about 2 to 4% increase in purchase services from a base, okay, the base now is $1 million more than it was 2 years ago. And so I haven't had the time, since I just got these yesterday, to look at what actually is making that $1 million up, okay? I know some of it, because that $1 million in 19 included those one-time expenses that you talked about, but that's maybe 300,000. But there's you know, when we talked earlier, Kevin, it was like 697,000. So again, I haven't had a chance to dig through the numbers, but the raw numbers would indicate from 6,177,000 to 7,320,000, 17 and 19. So again, $1.2 million increase. And that's where I have a little bit of concern as far as the base numbers are great. Okay, give me a $100,000 raise and then increase it minus 5%, and I'd be happy, right? So the base to me is key. And so as part of the discussion, I'd like to understand that $1 million increase. Although it's only 10% or 12% of your total budget, it went up by $1 million in 2 years.
Yeah, we can definitely, you might have to wait till the end.
No, not even today. I'm just saying that's one of the things that, as we're looking at budgeting and justifying an operating levy, we'd have to understand where the numbers are that increases it by $1 million in 2 years.
I've asked that question too on that specific line, is it a significant amount of that special education services?
Yeah, so we outsource a lot of our special education services. We had some pretty significant increases this past year. So, I mean, we can sit down and we can.
Right, I know that's where the 178 Title B came from. That's why I was asking, was there an equivalent offset to that? Because you're getting grant money specifically tied to that, right?
If I'm talking about IDAB, it's basically the same amount every year. So this is taking care of what it was doing the year before. The challenge with it as well is a lot of those, and Mr. Newell can speak to that directly as well, but a lot of those expenses are teaching staff and intervention specialists. So those costs are generally increasing and we're not getting any more IDAB money. So those dollars are already being spent over there. So it would be something being added to the operational. So, I mean, we can look at them more.
I'm just saying, you'd have to understand, I would like to be able to see those numbers at a little bit more granularity. Because it went from 6.2 to, say ballpark 6.2 to 7.3, and then is increasing on that 7.3 number over time, is how I understood the numbers, so. I'm not actually got the numbers from Kevin, so purchase services, all the 400 series numbers went from 6.177 to 6.320, or 7.320. So I was just looking at raw numbers, because again, I got this yesterday evening, I haven't had a chance to look through the details, but the raw numbers would indicate $1.2 million increase in 2 years. And actually, 1 year, right? From 18 to 19, all that happened.
So if we look at, so this is the forecast numbers. It's a lot of numbers. I'm sure everybody can see this.
Eye chart, we call that.
So your purchase services are 17, 18, 19, so it's right here. So it's a little bit more than.
Yeah, but let's be honest here, that's not the problem. That's not the problem we're facing. $1 million is not the problem. It's way bigger than that.
One of the problems.
We can look at some of those details.
You add up $1 million
Everything adds
15 times,
I know,
yep.
but it's the personnel costs. Let's
Yep.
cut to the
I-
chase
I
here. It's the
totally agree with you,
personnel
buddy.
costs. When you step back,
Totally
that's
agree with
the
you.
issue that you're faced with here.
They've created an unsustainable model.
Right. We've got
That needs to be
a
addressed
system that you
now.
cannot keep
Right.
supporting. It's not gonna work.
Nope,
Doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out.
right.
So we just wanted to address the permanent improvement fund quickly, although it's not in the 5-year forecast. So first, as an extension of our operating account, purchases are limited to any items that have useful life of 5 years or more, or upkeep or maintenance of those items. So for example, it could be building maintenance, technology needs. The top expense items for the last 4 years are maintenance costs, 32%, technology, 25%, buses, 16%, and paying back energy efficiency bonds. So these were zero interest bonds 8 or 10 years ago. For energy efficiency purposes, they paid for themselves times over, but that was part of permanent improvement fund. That rolls off in 2024. So that is not a tax saving, but it's massively come back to permanent improvement fund.
Just a quick question, and again, just as a reference point, this is not to solve the issue, but Forward Edge, the spending out of this fund went from about $500,000 to 1.2 million, almost 1.3 million in 3 years. So it just from a discussion point, I'd like to understand, you know, what, I don't have the next level of detail, but what they actually do with that money. I know it's technology only, not software, et cetera, but it's a doubling of cost. And again, $1 million here, $500,000 there, at the end of the day, it all adds up to real money. And it's fungible, right? So the money from there, if you didn't spend it on this, could be spent on something else that lasts more than 5 years. So that was just a question, not the immediate answer, but just one of the things as I was looking through, struck me that the trend was fairly significant, you know, literally doubling in 4 years, more than doubling in 4 years.
I think that's one we can easily answer
Good.
tonight as well. So we just wanted to talk about the top risks in our forecast assumptions. So first is revenue, state funding, as we talked about that, the guarantee. So the state does a biennial budget, they do a budget every 2 years. They just passed one. And so 2 years from now, they could have some major reforms, it could be the same. So there is some inherent risk involved in forecasting this because we're assuming that things are going to be the way they are now. So that is a revenue risk. I'll say more of our risks are on the expense side. So healthcare costs, as Barry talked about, some districts are 17 and 26% more. We're at 9%, it could be lower, it could be higher. It's a little bit of the art involved in forecasting. Special needs assistance, so student needs increase and staffing needs increase. So if we happen to get an influx of a population of children, we take care of them, we do everything we can to educate them, but obviously that does come at a cost. Building maintenance, so the reality is there are some concerns and issues that we do have with our buildings, so some issues do arise that will increase our current costs. Utility expenses, we've done a good job of keeping expenses low. Mr. Ames does a fantastic job of doing that. At the same time, there are some changes, there's some influxes. We're in consortiums, we have consortium pricing, we have locked pricing, but if things change over time, that could obviously affect us. Future negotiating agreements, so positive or negative, and unfunded mandates. So this is a school term that we use a lot. Amy, could you talk a little bit about this?
Sure. Annually, the state budget comes out and the ODE will require school districts to do a number of things which are typically unfunded. So for instance, the state law would require that all students graduate having CPR. So how do we make sure that all students get access to CPR? Easy answer might be make sure they do it in gym class, but a majority of our kids don't take PE class. They are athletes and they get their PE credit by participating in a school sport or band and soon to be show choir as a change. So how do we make sure that those kids get access to that? Does that increase staffing? Does that increase programming? Requirements for the 3rd grade reading guarantee, making sure that students make a certain benchmark on a test requires additional interventions, perhaps additional staff. So annually, the state will require the school district to be responsible for different things, and very rarely are there any funds that accompany those, and so those are always risks in the forecast for what we need to prepare for. We try to look ahead, we try to attend meetings and prepare for those things, but annually those things come up.
So this is just a general conversation about projections and expenses. So just be aware that the current deficit for the prior year was 2.8 million, 3.8 million this current year. We're not saying these are exact opportunities. We're just saying these are some ideas or thoughts as we start to talk about this as a group. So reductions in expenditures is reduction in programming, staffing. Purchase services, other areas to explore could be transportation, increased fees, pay to play, preschool, kindergarten tuition, general school fees, or finding opportunities within our textbooks. So again, this is just some general thoughts on it. And then we're going to open it up to more conversation in just a second. So as we move forward, request for an operating levy. We just want to make sure that when we talk about some guiding principles at the beginning, we want to prioritize expenditures that support the building and district improvement plans. So a lot of the work that has already taken place. some things to just think of as you're going through the process is the baseline is each mill roughly equals $900,000 in revenue. So that's total valuation. If you take the mill, $900,000 extra in revenue every year. Again, that gets to a high point and it flattens out. So we understand with this next point that we'll talk more about it. We just want to make it aware that to keep the way that things are right now without cuts in the budget and to grab a minimum balance of $9 million in 3 years, and operating a 9.95 mills is required. We also realize that's not necessarily something that the community would find palatable. So when we discussed 8.95, we already knew that there were places that we were going to have to reduce costs. So that's already a conversation that we've had internally. So don't feel like this is a bait and switch or something like that. When we said 8.95, we already knew there were places that we would have to look at. Yes.
Well, I'm just a little confused as to when you would have had the opportunity to have discussed that, because you were asked in a board meeting what operating levy would we have to put on to maintain, and your answer was 8.95, but you just said we discussed previously that 9.95 wouldn't be palatable, so we'd have to reduce it, but when outside of a board meeting would you have discussed that?
Well, I'm not saying necessarily with the board, I'm saying with administration and with Dr. Krause.
But just within the week between the levy passing and that board meeting, you guys knew you had to came up with that number?
The administrative team met the day after the levy.
So in one day, you came up with cutting it 1 mil, and now we're several weeks later and we're not, I mean, shouldn't we be down to 6.95 mil by now then? You see what I'm saying? Like, it just seems like that was an awfully rushed to still be where we are, saying that that number's on that.
Isn't the number that you're saying that that's what we exactly are?
That is, but that's not the number they gave in the board meeting.
To say that.
That's okay,
here's
I
where
just
we
think the
need to-
timing is a little interesting on that quick decision. No, I think we should start with whatever questions we want answered. I don't think that's, I wasn't accusing him of anything, I'm just curious.
Where the
If that
8.9
conversation happened the very day after the levy passed, and they were already able to cut 1 mil from the needed budget, that's an awfully quick cut. Why are we still, I mean, it's now weeks later, I feel like we should be, I mean, I submitted potential cuts to Dr. Krause weeks ago. Whether they're good or bad, or I never heard. But yet in one day, they were able to cut $900 million, that's.
$900,000.
900,000, not million.
Understand, like,
He
when you talk
understands.
about our conversation, like, can't we just start from here?
Hey, Kevin, is this based off?
You can start from wherever you want. I'm starting from the last board meeting,
4%
when he said
increase in
8.95.
expenses?
So, I mean, I wouldn't say that we came up with specifics.
And so what would be cut?
We brainstormed a list of things that stayed away from our mission and vision that we could talk about, that then Kevin and I went to try to quantify. So we did talk about some specific personnel issues, that's why we had the executive session, to bring the board along on that. So we can have a general conversation tonight. If somebody says, let's talk about transportation, we can give some general numbers and answer some of those questions, because we've started that work, and that's what we've
Good.
done
Yeah.
for the last few weeks.
Okay.
So I provided in your handout, in your folder, a handout, and it may or may not appeal to you. It's how I think, but anytime we talk about decisions, if we talk about a decision in March, it affects when we are going to come back. So whenever we talk about going to the ballot, we always have to talk about what would the next one look like, how much would it have to be. So if it has to do with that cash balance kind of thing. So asking for a low amount now would forecast out to ask for a higher amount later. So how do you try to balance those things out? There's an implication. If there were an easy answer between going in March and going in November, I put August on there because it's a real thing, but we're in 3 different counties, and if we're the only one on there, we'd have to pay for that, so it's on there. But so I put those on there for you to decide, but there's no easy answer to it. There's an implication for both. So as we're talking tonight, whenever we've been talking about it, I use this to just sort of capture implications. So as things come up that strike you, it's just a worksheet there for you to do that. That's the only reason it's there. It's something that I found useful, and perhaps you would as well.
Dr. Kraus, you were saying the implications of a March vote versus a November vote for the levy, and the difference in the budgeting based on those two different dates of budgeting or of votes, right? But could you help explain, as far as either one of those votes, you don't start collecting money until January 2021. Is it a different amount of money that you would collect based on whether it's passed in March or November, or is it the same amount of money?
It's the same amount of money.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that I'm on the right understanding. So if the ballot is in March, or the levy is in March, or the levy is in November, you start collecting the same amount of money, as long as the levy amount's the same, in January of 2021.
Correct.
Okay, so then explain to me the budgeting difference, because what you're suggesting is that there's a budgeting difference between those two dates. And I'm making the assumption that the budgeting difference is based on the fact that if you pass a levy in March, you have assured money coming in January for that next 21-22 school year. And if you don't have the levy in March and wait till the levy in November, then you've already gone through 4 months before you know whether you're going to have a levy approved, bringing money in January of 2021. So if you don't have the levy in March, then you would be looking at potentially wanting to do more cuts in those first 4 months of the 21-22 school year because you're not assured the money's coming in, or what is the difference? Help me.
So there's several implications. One of them would be that failure in March.
Or don't have it in March, right? Either
Failure
way.
in March, well, the implication for not having it in March would be November would be your option.
Right.
The implication for failure in having it in March and failure in March might be escalating some of those, making it harder in November. So implication.
Very true.
Implication for waiting until November and failing in November would be delaying it for an entire, it failed in November, it would delay an entire year, which would be a significant damage to the budget. In March, if we were to fail in March, and we would be able to know what cuts had to be made into the following school year. Failure in November, you run the risk of things not being able to be cut mid-year. So for instance, transportation might be an interesting cut for people, but that can't, the law would require that can't happen mid-year. You have teacher contracts. So would you be able to safely get through the next year without doing additional cuts prior to November for fear of potentially not passing in November? So it just restricts your time frame for decision making.
Thank you.
Is the delta between the levy that failed, the operating levy was 6.95? Is this because it's a higher amount? Is that for losing a year of revenue? Okay.
So it's 900,000 in revenue per mill, right? So the difference between a 695 and a 995 is ballpark 2.7 million, right? So 2.7 million would make up the 3 million or the 6 million gap in 2 years. It just, the math is challenged for me there, right? Maybe it's based on inflation, or did I do the math wrong?
So
It's based on his spending a lot of money.
If the levy would have passed in November, the first revenue would have been in January. So looking at $6 million loss. Maybe, correct me if I'm not answering this.
No, go ahead. That's
So you would have had $6 million in
2020. 6.2 million, 2020.
So we had, you can see it's 6.6
Oh. Maybe not.
It was 6.2.
2021, 22, now you lost that,
You lost 6.2 million in 2020.
Right.
and now you have to extend it another year in the last 3 years.
Right, but you'd be, if you go to 995, you're getting 2.7 million, right? In ballpark 2 years, I could make that 6 million back up, right? 2021, 2022, I'd basically, by the end of 2022, be on the same plane as I would be if I had the 695, right? And then I'd have at least one more year of making 2.7 million more than my earlier baseline. If you go to 2024, then the math starts to make sense to me. But you were saying by 2023 was your end date. The other way to look at it is if you look at page 22 of your 5-year forecast, you could do sort of the same math, right? At the end of 2022, you got a $3 million deficit, right? But if I needed 9 million, I'm bringing in extra.
Well, so let's just model it. So let's model it here. So this is the forecast. So this is how we do our forecasting. It's a massive Excel spreadsheet. And what you can see down at the bottom is line item 10.01. That is fiscal year 23.
Make sure that we know the difference between fiscal year and year.
I do. End of
Yeah, I
June.
mean, in those
Of the
calculations.
school year.
Yeah.
So if we look at it right now, we model in 9.95 million. That's where you're ending up, and actually, it's getting to 8.5 million at the end of fiscal year 23. So that would be July, end of June, and then you gotta make it to December to get.
Hey, Kevin, one thought here is, since you lost the revenue in 2020, and if you look at the forecast right now, if you look at the expenditures for 2020, there's obviously a gap. So could we look at this in 2 steps? Step number 1 is balance the budget in 2020. Okay, that solves all delays of revenue. And then move forward with, once you've balanced the budget, what's an acceptable, what are the needs going forward based on the forecast? And then what does that translate into millage? If I did the math right, if you're able to balance 2020 out, and that would require coming up with 3.9 million in choices, okay? And then if you just project that out forward, 3.9 divided by 0.9 or a million, that would cut the millage required from 10 down to 6. Okay, so one way we could look at this is have a conversation about how you balance it in 2020. What choices would need to be made?
Do that.
Okay? Is it,
Pretty hefty, but we could look at.
but start, I mean, I understand, I mean, again, it's just a conversation around choices. It's your guys' decision on whether or not you want to execute those choices. Okay, but that would square us on this delay. Okay, because I think people are getting hung up on the delay. And one thing to simplify the delay is, okay, just square 2020. Okay, that's within your control. And then it's very easy for people to then take your forecast, say, okay, do I believe your forecast or don't I? That equals this millage, and go from there.
The only thing I would say about trying to balance 20 at this point, what we run into is the bulk of our expenses are people related.
Sure.
So if you're not necessarily touching staff,
I'm not saying it's a good idea. I'm just saying it's an idea. Yeah, no, listen.
I appreciate what you're saying. So,
You know.
depending on almost half of the non-payroll expenses, potentially.
Yeah.
And the reality is a lot of those some of those we just can't touch. So, I mean, it's a good place to start.
So what, in the $54 million, what's not touchable?
So that I would say that's going back more towards, I would say, sort of Dr. Kraus and some of the instructional leaders probably touch upon that. So I'm not just, but I'm the money guy.
Can't we say things like turning lights on? We have to turn lights on. We can't touch that money. We have to turn lights on.
But so, like, we can talk about some of these
Just the
things
money
as
guy.
to what are opportunities, what are potentials. That would be outside of my area specifically. So I would turn it over to Dr. Kraus if you wanted to talk about anything.
No, but I'm sorry
No,
to
go
interrupt, but, because like at the end of the day, if it's untouchable and we can't do anything about it, you're basically saying, like, so what do we do? I mean, and what I would say, and this might not be the right approach, but the administration, everything is touchable. The question is just when, you know? So we could either take an approach that nothing's touchable and I can't do with that, or I can take the approach that, no, everything is touchable. And then it's up to this, you know, this committee and your staff to say, is that what I want? I'm just trying to get to, like,
Sure.
put the choices on the table. And how I simplistically think about it is two steps. Balance 2020 to address the delay in funding that, you know, that there was an assumption made on the last 5-year forecast that funding would be available. Balance it, here are the choices. Is that what we want to go do? And if not, then we get into the conversation, okay, well, what's an alternative?
Well, can I add to that? So, maybe even to build on that thought, what are the scenarios? In other words, if we don't pass the levy in March or November or whatever, there's 0 additional increases, something's gonna happen, right? You are on an unsustainable path right now. So what happens? What's that scenario look like? I'm not saying I'm in favor of that, I'm not. But what happens? And in fact, I'd like to see several scenarios. If we pass a 3 mil levy, this happens. We pass a 7 mil, whatever. You tell me what the numbers are. But what are the scenarios?
Well, I mean, so that's, I would say, if you're looking at 995 as your high water marks, your ceiling, you're working down from there from a millage standpoint.
Well, yeah, I guess the other thing that's sticking in the back of my mind is, okay, we're dealing just with operating expenses right now. The building issue that was put on this last levy is still sitting there, right? And I know there's different views in the community about whether we should do this or that, right? I get it. But I think there is a base level of support saying, listen, the elementary and primary schools are, 80-some odd years old? At some point, those are gonna have to get dealt with. We can't just keep sticking our head in the sand about that. So I'm thinking, when's the other shoe gonna drop also, right? So you're gonna deal with the operating expense issue, but you still got the building issue. So I'm gonna step back and say, what's the plan? And more importantly, what are the potential plans? So we can do this, or we can, give me 5 different scenarios. Yeah, whatever, you tell me, you guys are close to the numbers. What's it look like? What are the options?
Kevin, can I ask a question about options? What does an income tax? I came from, when I moved down here from the Dayton area, we had a school district income tax. Fairborn City Schools had a 0.5%. A very like demographic school district, Troy, had a 1.5%. Have we explored that? What does that look like in this community? Because I know we don't have industry here to support our property tax, so is that an option?
Yeah, so we explored that option with the last levy. We did have discussions about it. It was not something that was presented going forward. I think it's still something that we do need to continue to talk about. I would say my concerns currently with an income tax is the reality is what you're talking about. We have to get something done. And in my profession, when you start moving away from it was really difficult to try to explain this last levy, there were some concerns that if we suddenly just pivot and start talking about a different revenue source, just for right now, I would have some serious concerns about not being able to pass a levy.
Is that even an option for those of us who live in the townships?
Yes, so a
Can
school
you
district.
can you levy an income tax in a township?
Yes, so school district income tax affects community members. So if you work, so if you work in a district that has school district income tax, you do not pay that income tax because it doesn't benefit you as somebody who works in that district because you don't live in that district. If you live in the school district, you would be charged.
Okay, got it.
Correct.
I was just thinking with the number of apartments that we've recently added in town, that it may be something that could help us moving forward.
I think it's definitely something to look at in the future, and, it's obviously the board's decision. I would say the challenge too is that there's two separate types of income taxes, so there's the earned income tax or regular income tax. When I talk to a lot of people on the phone, like they obviously would have preferred in their current state was an earned income tax. Then the earned income tax, it has to be that much higher to be able to make up the difference. So an earned income tax won't necessarily tax fixed income, things like that. My concern really is, the school district has to figure something out. We should probably continue having that conversation going forward. I don't know if it's the right solution right now. I think there's a lot of research that would need to be done in the meantime. But I think it's still something to keep on the table. I just don't know, like, in the next 2 weeks.
No, that's fair, that's fair.
Kevin, I would just also say that the committee should be aware that the board has, at least 2 different occasions in the past, done some serious work on an income tax. And had a rather large committee such as this at one point for income tax. And then, as you said, the last levy did some investigation into income tax and have met thus far with quite a bit of resistance from the community to move to an income tax. Part of that, I think, is the last time that we looked at it, there were a couple of districts in the area that had income taxes that were also having to come back for more property tax as well. In other words, the income tax, which was originally billed years ago as pass an income tax and you don't have to do any more property tax. You'll just take care of it because income grows. Well, we all know that didn't happen in 2008, so that was a problem. So it's not quite as simple as it used to be when they said, pass an income tax, you solve your problems. You don't have to ask for any more property tax. That has not been the case for some districts where they've got an income tax. They've either had to come back for more income tax or they've come back for more property tax because the income tax has not been providing what they needed. And then, as you said, there's the issue between the earned and the straight income tax. There's also a problem with collections. So even if we were able to say this committee recommended or the community recommended that we look at an income tax in 2020 instead of a property tax, there's a much further implication for collection because that collection takes much longer than property tax does. So I can't remember the percentages now, but you would be looking at a passage in 2020 of collection of only a certain portion in 2021. You wouldn't have full collection till another year, as I understand it.
So, I mean, I think, and I hear the scenarios conversation, I don't know if it's worth at this point amongst each other or in a greater group. The reality is we gotta figure out, because we're doing March and we're doing November. We have some pretty quick timeframes to turn that around.
Dr. Lorenz, just because I know you're pretty senior with the board, out of the box thinking with the income tax, what about like hybrid schools? I mean, we're talking brick and mortar, we're talking we want to offer more classes. Like, have we ever investigated more of this online option? We're sending people to CCP, so we're already doing like different digital schools or sending them off campus to go someplace else. Where does like a hybrid model
Just a
stand?
quick answer to the College Credit Plus. In fact, College Credit Plus is coming back more and more to the district than just sending people out to College Credit
I
Plus.
heard her speak about that at the board meeting. yeah.
I was a College Credit Plus mentor at the University of Cincinnati, and they have completely done away with the on-campus language programs for College Credit Plus, for world languages. They're doing those on campuses, and they're getting out of that business. So a lot of it is coming back to the high schools instead of sending students out. As to the hybrid and the notion of, making huge changes in how we do business in schools, that's certainly not something that can be investigated for a 2020, whether it's March or November. I think there are many, many issues with that as to, whether the community would support having their students be home a certain amount of the time, that kind of thing. I think that's the problem with the hybrid.
And there's a lot of states that are doing it. I don't know, we don't have commercial, we're landlocked. I mean, I just feel like a lot of it is adding up to, colleges obviously have a lot of online. So, I mean, once they leave us, we're trying to prepare them for tomorrow. They're gonna do different, semester online classes from their December to January. My physical therapist is doing like a full semester at UC online. I don't know, it's just something to throw out there, and you're the educators, and, we're talking about cutting operating, cutting buildings, teachers. I mean, we could offer more to the community if we had more online opportunities that wouldn't require all the infrastructure and the operating that goes with that.
It might very well help at the high school level. It's certainly not going to help us at the
There's a lot of studies that talk about
elementary
even
level.
at the middle school. There's talk even K through 8. A lot of different models with, who comes to school on certain days, what work they do. Heck, we tried like blizzard bags for like a little pocket of time because we didn't want to lose like school days. So, I mean, I felt like the concept has been out there kicking around a little bit, just.
That feels like something huge, right? Like we're
Clearly
talking
not for
about
this
equipment.
operating levy, but I mean, the
Yeah.
community's not happy.
So if our
At some
goals
point,
are
we
to think about the operating levy, that might be
Listen,
like
I
a hard one,
make no
right?
mistake that I know why we're here, but the community can only be tapped so much. I mean, we're cringing that we're not gonna pass this operating levy.
Sure. I mean, I think it's a fair point, Tammy. I think there is an economic, conversation of folks, if they can afford to be home with their kids, if they're not gonna be in school. So I think there's just like we talked about, can folks feeling the economic, there's a different economic challenge to that. Not everybody can afford to have a parent.
Or, the older they are, they don't have to be, too.
Yeah.
I mean,
but
just.
yeah, I mean, it's definitely something to ideate on. I think there's a lot of things to.
Kevin, I have a quick question for you. Reevaluations of property happen this year, or 2020? Is that only Hamilton County, or is that every county? Do you know?
Hamilton and Claremont.
And
Hamilton is triennial update, Claremont is reappraisal.
so if something were passed in March, say it's, I don't know, pick a number, 5, and then properties are reevaluated.
Good number.
Should I have said 20 just to make it
you
like
should
we
not have
don't
said
talk
20.
that? Not a real number. And then properties are reevaluated after that's passed. Is then the millage recalculated when collected? So it's effectively a lower millage.
Yeah, so that's the reduction factor.
Okay.
So although homes would be, most likely at this point, homes would be reappraised and triennial updates at a higher value, the millage would effectively go down, the effective tax rate would decrease essentially.
So the
Okay.
funding's flat. Got it.
And what have property values gone up historically? Do you know when they've done the reevaluation? Like, I mean, our pool about. Yeah, I mean, no, it's gone up. Is it 6%, I think, something like that?
I don't know the exact, I can show you the first one's commission
So
guys
it's a
go
flat
up,
number.
The reduction factor just kind of cut it back, so you're right where you started, right?
You are right where you started in terms of dollar value, yeah.
Are you talking about where you would actually start? Because it gets reassessed, so it'll get reassessed at a higher level, and then the levy is assessed at the higher level?
No, I was just making sure that was how it was collected, was that way.
Historically, they have gone up over time. This is the last 10 years. Not to bring up any bad memories, but it obviously brings up some bad years. So you see here, I don't know if you can probably guess. So those are your total evaluations in the district from 2007 through 2018. You can see the negatives in there. So 2011 would have been the triennial
So what do we need to do moving forward? Like, I know some people came in with ideas about kind of cuts that should be made, or like what our target should be in terms of millage. Like, is our decision, do we stick with the 9.9 number and we talk about that? Do we, I've also heard the number 6 point, do we with that, and if we're gonna say 6.9, this is what it means in terms of cuts. Like, I feel like we need to figure out what our next step is.
So we can, so I like the word scenarios that are heard over here, and so a couple of things about scenarios when we're talking about staffing and speed. And so we talk about, a scenario, I'm not suggesting that I'm done with the scenario work, I'm just trying to listen and capture how to move forward. So a scenario would be, so $500,000, so $450,000 looks like 5 teachers or 12 classified staff. So if you were gonna be scenarios. What we can't do, like, we just have to talk about, are we okay with that? Now, we can tell you, like, 5, we're calling that away from staffing, or away from the program, and 12 starts to eliminate programs. We can start to do that, but we can't talk specifically about, oh, that's 5 teachers, 1 at every grade level, because those are people, and we have to message things internally. We certainly don't want to be talking about specific cuts to the community without talking to our staff, about those things. So scenarios when we're talking about staffing are very general, looking like things like, are we comfortable with 5 staff, 5 or 5 certified staff, as an example. And we can come on the 3rd with some ideas about how impactful some of that would be. But understand, those scenarios when we're talking about people are not going to be high specificity about where they are.
I don't think they need to be.
Yeah.
I'm just forewarning, like, that's just gonna be a protection from a matter of, now, it would be, let's say we have those conversations, everyone's like, yes, all in, let's do March. So we have to, and we've decided that it's this millage, and we're gonna go forward and communicate that. We'll then do the work and start communicating with staff. People would know what those cuts were prior to a March vote. We just have to have time to talk to people internally for that lag. Does that make sense?
Yeah, another question for you. So I'm back to the financial plan. I want to make sure I'm reading this right. So June 30th of next year, 2020, the district has $11.3 million in the bank.
Yes.
Is that correct? And then, obviously, June of 2021 is 5.2. And then the following year will fall off the cliff.
No, but I think that's important, because how I was reading this, one choice you could make, Julia, you brought it up earlier, is if you need $9 million in the bank for cash, if that's the minimum requirement, you've got $2.3 million to play with. So you need 3.9 to balance it. You could reduce your cash reserves, to get a significant portion of that, and then you'd have to figure another, then you get, the tough choices come in. Because that's what your slide said, was, I need $9 million. Okay, so I understand that, I'm well versed on the difference between a cash statement and a P&L statement, but you have a choice that's on the table, that you could reduce your cash needs by the end of 2020. That could be a choice that you make.
For 1 year, John.
For 1 year, but then you put the levy on March.
But your point, I think, was spot on, is it's a combination. I made it before.
You gotta do all
It's your
three.
starting point,
Right.
right? If your starting point went up $1.5 million, for example, right? and then you're saying I'm going up 4 or 5% from there, reduce your starting point by $1.5 million or $2 million, and it doesn't have to be all teachers, obviously, because we've identified a few other places where money is being spent. Look at those non-teacher aspects. And one of the things I've asked for, and Kevin has been great in getting me information, but what has been the head count by department, okay, for the last 5 years, right? It's not all teachers, right? There's some admin, there's some secretaries, there's other positions, possibly, I'm guessing, that have been added, but I don't have visibility to that. You guys have visibility to that. So when you talk about headcount reduction, it doesn't necessarily just need to be teachers and certified. It could be other non-teaching type of positions. And then I brought up the point about Forward Edge, right? And them as a consultant, basically with services, we're paying $600,000 more for those versus 2 years ago. Is that because they do all the work and we pay them for that versus a technician that could cost a third of that and buy it ourselves? I don't know those answers. But there's other ways you could save money potentially. And your point is basically somebody else made, I think John Becker at one point, zero baseline budgeting, right? Don't assume that you had the money from last year. Say justify your numbers. Why do you need it in 2020? Right? Don't go saying I spent it last year, so I'm going to spend it this year. What are those baseline numbers of what you actually need? Because the issue here, as I see it, isn't the fact that you have a unbalanced. It's Juliet said it's unsustainable, right? The increase, but that also is impacted. What is the base that you're increasing it from? And from just a basic view that I've seen, there's some things that have increased that base $1.5 million. That if you could reduce it, that base by $1.5 million, you're halfway to John's balancing in 2020. And when you start off at a lower base, and then hopefully you could decrease the slope a bit, then it doesn't become an issue about, 3 years out having $9 million. You could have it $9 million with, a half of that amount and have $9 million in 2 years. Basically, if you could reduce your starting point and reduce the slope, that's the issue. And I would ask for those that are in industry and not teachers, okay, in the last 10 years, let's just say last 5 years, how many got a 4% increase every year?
Be
okay,
nice.
I can tell you that I didn't, okay? Some years it was goose eggs, right? And some years it was 2 or 3 max, right? So one of the things as well is baseline for teachers, I don't know what the baseline for industry, we had comps, right? You'd say this position, this time of experience, here's the comps of what those people are paid at various locations, right? And so you try to match those comps or keep people employed because you don't want to have turnover either. And teachers are, you're basically a service organization, right? So you want to maintain the morale and not have the turnover. But I have no idea, and I'm sure you do these comps, okay? Where are we, today's pay, against comps of, the neighboring teachers, okay? Are we at the average? Are we above average? Are we gaining on the average? It just seems like from the economy, and if we're, the inflation is 1.67 over the last 5 years, and we're increasing everything by 4 or 5% a year, you're right. It's unsustainable, and you're going to have ever increasing levies, which is evident by the fact the last levy, was 4.2 million coming in. Now we're looking at the one that failed was 6.2. Now we're looking at 8.9 or something, right? 9.95. Anyhow, you're going to have an ever increasing amount of money. And what the community is saying is that that's not sustainable for us as a community. That's not even talking about, buying 110 acres and building 3 new buildings and half the money from the levies going into middle school and high school and all the rest. That's not even, those things are aside. Just the operating levy, okay? It has to start with the baseline. What you're spending has a baseline and justify it and look at it. And so when we talk about transportation and teachers, okay, first don't look at the transportation and teachers. Look at all the other areas you could save. The gentleman back here made a point that teachers 83%, but if you got $1.5 million that are teachers, okay, that's $1.5 million levy, right? But my point is that you reduce the starting gate, right? You're reducing the base, and so now your increases as actual dollars is less every year because you've started at a lower base. that would be the point I would make, is what is that number, right? That you could, you brainstormed areas to take money at. We've looked at it from, the outside looking in, and I've identified some areas, at least for questions, as far as the base increasing. I mentioned a couple of those. There may be a few more. Kevin and Dr. Amy Cross is more involved with the numbers. There may be other places, okay? But if, 83% is in salaries, maybe that's a point in 2021 when this contract is renewed, maybe it's not a 4% increase a year, right? Who is making a 4% increase in a year, right? Nobody. In my experience, over the last 10 years, nobody's making 4% increase a year, okay? As a baseline. Promotions, a different matter. But baseline, I show up, I come to work, I'm gonna get 4% increase every year. Nobody gets that.
Just to be clear, our LEA agreement last time was 2% and then 2%.
Yeah, I was.
2% plus 2%.
It was over 2 years though, sir.
There was a gap
No, it's
year.
4%.
No,
And it was 2 years. Trust me, it's 2 years, 2%, 2%.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, there's two parts.
My
to it.
understanding in the contract is
There's the
that every year it's
experience
2% plus 2%. That's what you put in here.
Right.
It would be,
Isn't that
it would be a
4%?
step on increase. Example, if you're at year 20 to year 30, you only
Yeah.
get 2%. You don't get the experiences. Experience stops at year
Spouse to year 20, and there are gaps in there also.
So there'll be 15 years where there's no experience left. It's just,
So, yeah, so 20, once I hit 20 years, I won't get another experience step after that. I'll count on any raise that we given, which at sometimes was 1.5, has been 2.
Why is it budgeted at 4 then?
I don't-
The budget is 4.
I'm just a lowly teacher, man. I'm just telling you what I got. I'm just telling you what my agreement
Question
says.
to you, why would it be budgeted at 4 then?
So not everybody has hit that max. I mean, this is part of the art in doing it is finding an average of that. So that's what the 4% is. There are a lot of teachers who go on the experience stuff. Not every step is 2% either. So we don't have a flat from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 is 2%. There's variation in there. So that's the line.
I think you.
Yeah, so 4 is the high end though. Why wouldn't you use?
Somebody's getting 5 and 6. If somebody getting 5 and 6, make the average 4. Take the actual that you had, put it into the system, and actually make it.
I don't know.
Here's the
I mean,
problem.
that's important because this is a big difference, 2% versus 4%. When you project that over, compound
Right.
growth rate, that's a big difference.
If you step back from all this and you say, what are we all talking about? We're all talking about things we all don't listen to a whole lot about, some of us know a little bit about. And, we're sitting there thinking, we want to get the public support for whatever we do. I remember at the end of July, I gave a speech after we voted on the and I try to reflect on what happened. And it was kind of simple, really, because you look at what, we were questioned to make a lot of quick decisions. And it was a bad way to do it. It's the only way we could do it, because we only had 8 to 9 weeks to respond to something we didn't think was quite right. Now the tables are turned. You guys don't have to have the same kind of situation we had, because you got time here to think about this. You don't have to rush 2 weeks from now to try to get something on that none of us really, every time I pick up a piece of paper and read data or look at a report, I have 10 more questions. And I think the people under here, I've got some of them different things that, if we can get some groups together and say, yeah, let's tear this thing apart. Let's look at school funding sources. Let's look at forming committees to engage legislature. Let's look at school funding needs, operating needs. But don't do it all in a big group. Get people that know about these things to work together to try to get a plan together. So come November, we can all sit back and say, yeah, this is reasonable for the community. Because we are getting ourselves in a corner here. Because I'm telling you, I sat at the polls all day in the rain and met a lot of nice people. But really, a lot of people are really upset. If we walk out and say, 2 months later, well, we got the answer now, they're gonna say, you're not listening to us, you're not paying attention to us. And I think we have an opportunity to do a great job here if we give ourselves some time and come up and do this right. Do all
No,
the things
I would second what you're saying.
Yeah, do all
Trying to
the
ram
things-
it in March is
Yeah,
just
so all
fast.
the things we're talking about.
And you've got money in the bank, you're not gonna die next year.
And
You got a problem, but you're not gonna die next year.
there's nobody
Take
in
the
this.
time to do it right.
Yeah, nobody in this room is So that's my humble opinion about it.
I agree.
And I know a lot of people that I work with, and I'm very proud to work with, because I know a lot of great people that really care a lot about this stuff. But let's do it right. Let's not rush this thing and make a big mistake, and then get more and more folks looking at us like, are you all nuts? Because it was there. I mean, when I went around and I counted the votes at a couple of polling places in New York, I was for when I saw the numbers. If that doesn't tell us community something, I don't know what does. So, I think.
So what do we do if it doesn't pass in November? Or do we don't worry
See,
about that? I think
no,
that's
no,
what
no.
I think that's what John's
No, I
saying.
think that's
Come
the
up with
point.
something.
You've gotta come up with
Yeah.
a plan.
Because if you alienate any more folks, you're not gonna get enough people to vote for this.
You've got, up on the board, you've got trust issues
Yeah, you
and
got it.
transparency, and it gets out in the community, like 3 weeks from now, it's gonna go on the ballot in March. Everybody's gonna say, whoa,
We wanna see
why?
rumors
I don't know
flying.
anything
Wait
yet.
till this one goes out.
You
We
gotta
better
put,
all change our phone numbers and addresses.
you gotta put the sales pitch
Right.
together,
Yeah.
and then put it on the ballot, so everybody's in. But you say it's going on the ballot, no sales pitch, no transparency, I think you're
Well,
dead
and-
again.
And no bigger plan, because the building issue is
Yeah.
still out there.
We got.
What's the
So
plan?
I hear,
That's my
you,
question.
and I, despite what we all know how I felt about the last one, like, I haven't made a decision and I don't know how I feel, but I sort of feel like we're coming in saying, this is what we should do, and I don't feel like I can make a decision right now. I don't feel like I know enough.
Right. You don't
About
have
both
to. You don't have
sides.
to
Right.
force into that.
We're saying the same
But
thing.
But
but
why?
I'm also saying I'm not comfortable saying I'm gonna wait.
I
till
think,
November.
I think
I'm
we
not
know this,
comfortable
I
saying
have a
that.
trust in people, and if we come up with something that we can believe. People, if you look at the history of this, other places I've lived, people support the right stuff. I have faith in people, come up with the right plan.
I'm glad that you have faith. I don't necessarily, and I'm just saying, like, I feel like there needs to be more discussion. I'm just not comfortable saying, no, we're not gonna put a ballot.
Us having a discussion and not having,
Well-
break this thing down and use our, all of our brains to put together the talents. Say, let's have this group focus on this group, focus, so we can all determine what we're asking.
I hear what you're saying. I'm just
That's all.
expressing another point of view.
Angela, one of the differences, or one of the issues I think Dr. Kraus addressed this is, regardless of whether we vote in March or November, if we pass a levy in March or November, the impact relative to schools is the same, right? If we pass it. The danger is, if we wait till next November and don't pass it, well then now you're in trouble.
But also, I'm sorry, you go ahead.
Well, and the conversation then moves, and that's mitigating what Dr. Kraus spoke about, that we're kicking the proverbial can down the road, although, at least what I hear, and you know, lost trust is very subjective. We're talking a lot of facts here, and then when we talk about lost trust, that's an individual feeling. The reality is, I have trust, but I tend to lean toward the fact that having a little more time might be fortuitous. Because, and again, subjective as heck, but what the general sense was we didn't have enough time as a community to react, and that's why the vote swayed the way it did. And so it feels practical that if we go right back to a spring vote, that we have a lot of work to do to mitigate the problems from the first go-round. But we'd be walking into a situation where the narrative could very easily be, here we go again.
I'm big on verbiage, and so this community, just being new here, it's been a blessing, and then also, like, I have a life, and, like, so I won't even get involved in this. So, I think the verbiage is really strong to unite together for a levy by November, but that also means possibly March, right? But if we all committed to a levy passed by November, that doesn't exclude this idea of an earlier one. And if the magic happens, right, and we have that trust built by then, I think then that's when we make that decision.
Sorry.
That's kind of what I felt like
You have to
on the-
decide in 2 weeks.
We only have
challenge
2
is-
weeks.
Right, that's what I'm saying, magic.
We're like in Christmas Miracle Land.
Right,
I mean,
but that's what I'm hearing is everybody wants a passed levy. Like, there it is, like, we all do want that. It just is gonna take way more of what happened last week, obviously, relationship building and conversations in those pockets of small, smart minds on what they're passionate about, right? So I just say that we need to change this verbiage because I see you guys shutting down as somebody says March, and then like somebody says November and it's the other side shuts down. So we need to really stay open to just levy by November and allowing it to happen. Like, we don't need to force this. We really don't. We're all working together. I see that through and through.
I think we can also involve the community and communicate clearly with transparency and build that trust with everybody that would be voting by November so that there's like a 100%, we know what we're doing, we know why we're doing it, and we all agree we did it the right way.
Yeah, by November.
By November.
By November.
But it's not an on-off
So,
switch.
If we say, let's wait till November, we don't put something on in March, what are the cuts gonna look like what are the cuts gonna look like? What is gonna
Be the same.
happen? I mean, we have to do something,
That's
yes.
the detail we've got to get when we
Right.
go that way, that's the detail.
I guess that's what I'm saying. I'm not
We
comfortable
don't
saying,
know.
I understand what you're saying. I'm saying I'm not comfortable saying we're not gonna put it on March, not knowing what cuts that's gonna result in. That's the information I need.
If we don't know, the list is even deeper in March. If we don't know.
Right.
We have to know.
So, and I think what Dale was saying earlier is, okay, look at all non-personnel first, and say, what can we remove from non-personnel? And, answer the question about forward ed, what can we remove that's non-personnel? If we had a list next week that said, okay, here's non-personnel things we think we can remove. It might include some transportation things that for next year, we would say, we're gonna take that off. We burn down that list, okay, we come up with whatever. And then we say, okay, from there, it would mean that there's, Amy said, five teachers, limited salary, that's $450,000. Then we make some trade-off decisions to say, okay, are we comfortable with that? That's the trade-off. If we don't go for March, we're probably gonna have to do that for the next. That's a great way of saying it. I wanna know what the trade-off is. So, so I think we have to come up with a scenario to say that's the trade-off, that if we have to plan for next school year, that if November didn't pass, we have to make those changes at the beginning of the school year, because most of them are, things that are in contract that we can play past for the next calendar, next school year.
I want to talk about personnel for just a moment. I'm a teacher, so I came from a district that levy failed over and over and over again. We went to 0 steps, 0% increase for a few years. One of the things that we did there was they offered early retirement to teachers over a certain amount of years. And I felt like that was a nice option for people, personnel, instead of saying, okay, we're gonna get rid of 5 people, because honestly, if you're getting rid of 5 people, it's probably the newer teachers that are making less money. To give the personnel that option of, and I think it was even like 10 years, if you had 10 years, you got a certain amount. And so some people wanted to be stay-at-home parents, and so they took that retirement because they're like, I kind of want to stay home now, I kind of want to do this, but they got the retirement out of it. And I kind of felt like that gave them a voice, and it wasn't like we were cutting people, we were giving them the option, and I know that saved a tremendous amount of money where I was.
The other thing is how many, just to add on to that point, is how many teachers will be retiring in the next 2 years, right? And not replace them instead of firing them, is just have an attrition and do natural attrition and backfill if and as required, but not every position. Those are.
When if I had 27 years and I was trying to get to 30, but they offered me some kind of incentive, I might tap out at 27.
And, to piggyback on what you're saying, part of the last negotiated agreement was we fought to have a compensation committee. And it was done once before and it kind of went to the wayside. Bring that back and do the compensation committee and talk about things like that. How can we do things differently maybe at Loveland that maybe works out for everybody? And you brought up one of the, that's a question I have, is what if can we offer early retirement? What does that look like? How much does that cost? what's the impact on our staff and things like that, so, that's a very good point.
The kid, also what's impact on the kids. I mean, right now my kids are in 29 kid classrooms, so we offer this retirement package. There goes that teacher, my kid's now in 32, 35 classroom. I don't know.
But they
What
could
is that?
hire in
A
younger
cheaper.
teacher.
If
Okay,
you're,
cheaper
like you said,
teacher.
if
Got
you're
it.
a 27-year
Got
teacher,
it.
and you're
And
buying
now you're gonna
3
hire
years or
in,
whatever,
okay,
and then
okay.
you're buying, yeah, exactly.
Is that already encouraged in already? Are you already hiring, like already right now? Like when somebody leaves, are you already hiring the new, I'll say, teachers, base teachers?
The majority of the teachers that we're
Okay.
hiring are
Okay.
younger,
Okay.
out of college.
Sort of depends on what,
Or-
first, we
you
get
never say
500
younger.
applications
It's
for a
always
first
entry
grade
level.
teacher.
What's that?
Entry level, yeah, that's
Entry
what I
level.
meant. I was trying to say that, yeah.
Me and my verbiage has always been a problem, so yeah.
So like a first grade, we get 500 applications for a first grade teacher, sure. But if we're looking,
Right.
German
That's the
teacher.
point. If you're looking for
Yeah,
something
right,
special,
right.
like an AP physics teacher, you're
Right,
not gonna
right,
hire.
right.
you have to
Or like you
find
said, the
someone-
German teacher, yeah, that's gonna be.
The other thing would be helpful to John's point, I'm looking at page 21, and by the literal language here and how I understood the contract, it's 2% annual increase in base salary and 2% annual increase in annual experience step. So if that's not accurate, then it'd be helpful to have what is the actual contract.
You say that again.
I'm on page 21.
Okay.
Oh, 21 of that.
That's what I'm saying. So that's not what the language here says, and that's not how I understood the
Yeah,
contract
that's
when I
not
read
what
through it. So
Being
I'd
a-
like to just have it clarified.
Being a
if you
number
could.
guy, I think the teacher contracts are visible for everyone to see, correct?
No, I have a copy of it. That's
Like,
why I'm
so it should
asking.
show,
It
it
has
should
a
show
scale
the
on the
salaries.
side by year, and
It
it
should
has
show like,
salaries.
yeah, it should
and
show like the steps, like how many years experience they have.
It has 0 through 30. If you want to
Correct.
stay there, but not do the advanced degrees, you just go, that's what I'd like explained. What does that look like? It's one of the appendix 1 or appendix A in the contract listed on the left side. It has numbers, 1 through 30, right, with annual increases. And so my assumption, because it doesn't say it's every year, but it's by year, and this tells me it's by year. So, but John is saying it's not. So, just maybe a side explanation at some point, understanding that, because I'm going back to what John said is not annual, and yet it says it's
think he
annual.
said it
And
was
the fact
annual,
that
but
It
it's
is, I get
2%, not
2%.
4%.
no,
I said I get
4% is
2%
annual
per
base salary. There's no question there, but
He
then
wasn't saying it's not annual, he's saying it's not 4%.
it's 2 plus 2. Right. But it's critically important because it's the
Largest line item.
slope of the curve. It's a slope of the curve of 83% of the spending, right? And that's,
I'm also like feeling that future feeling that I get sometimes when like people start getting restless and things start backing up the bags a little bit, right? So like what do we need to do next between now and December 3rd? It feels to me like maybe we have lots of questions that we wanna get answered. Is that fair? Like, so do we need to brainstorm those questions? Do we need to put those questions on Post-it notes? And then, so the board can kind of sort them into categories, so they can figure out how to answer it. We want the board to come back and give us possibilities of, if we don't put the ballot, or if we don't put the levy on in March, here are 3 scenarios. What do we want, or what do we need to make an informed
So
decision?
Angela, we can bring you back some scenarios. I'm a little uncomfortable with questions because December 3rd is literally the day after tomorrow. Right, I mean,
Right.
so the ability to be able to the ability to give any impression that,
Anybody is having any type
right.
of.
which gets to the point.
And so the point of this group is, are we going in March or November? So, like, to me, we'll come back with some scenarios to give that. What I would like you guys to think through is settle this in, and what are some of the implications? Like in thinking back at some of these things. So March, I hear that we're gonna be a problem with this trust and being able to bring people along. One of the things that I think about with November is this notion of scare tactics, because there's gonna have to be a cut list. And people aren't gonna like it. So just, it's an implication. Like, no matter what we do between now and November, and we, 20 times the number of people that come and we're all like, oh yeah, we're all in. It's still not gonna change the fact that it's gonna come down to yes or no, here's what happens if it doesn't. So these things are gonna bump up, they're just implications. It's not,
That's what you can use us to help you with that, you know.
right.
Right.
I'm just saying that, like, that's what, I just want you to think through those for the next time, because the 3rd, we're also gonna be talking about the implications of property and not property, because we have to act on that contract by March 1st. So the Groveville property is a topic for the 3rd too, and we can come back with some scenarios. So I just don't wanna give the impression that other than, and we're prepared to sort of, I don't know what happened to Kevin, I'm just. He was over there a minute ago. He was there. He's left. There he is. We can group some things in some scenarios, and we're prepared to do that. So we can have that ready.
One more thing, I'm sorry.
Of course.
I think like as we think about those things, this transparency and this trust is for sure issues. But I think it's also fair to say, so how do we repair if we go this path? What are some things we can do? And if we go this path, what are some things we can do? I just want us as a committee to like back to that, what our goals are. I don't want us to be locked into something and we're only thinking about this one way, myself included. I'm saying this to myself as well, right? So just something for us to be thinking about.
If I thought that there was a perfect answer, I would have led with, and here's my recommendation. Like, I mean, this is a tough one. And so it's simply a matter of understanding, because here's something that's gonna happen. We choose to go to November, no problem. We start going down that path and we start going with a cut list. Somebody's gonna lose their mind. Why didn't you put this on in March? We would have had the opportunity. We totally would have supported that.
Why would it be a different cut list based on March or November?
Because if
Again.
because if we fail in March, we would have November to go back. If we fail in November, we lose a year.
I think moving forward, at least for me, if we had a bulletized list of everything that was on the levy with maybe a price tag on it, we could sort it and bucketize it into, there's no way.
Bucketized a couple of things. I like the way you say, like.
Yeah, I had a hysterectomy on Monday, so I'm on medicine.
Wow.
She's very
I probably
committed.
shouldn't be sitting up this long. I'm hungry and everything, but for me, just throw magnets, strips of just boom, 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 and then just the trauma center. You come in, this person needs stitches and an ice pack, boom. This person needs heart surgery, boom.
Yep.
And then we get that, we can get that together on March and say, look, this is our must-have, yeah.
And we always talk
We
about the
need this
baseline. I
happen.
think that's the biggest part, because we're increasing from the base. That's what we've been trying to get from Mr. Hawley all along, is in the last few years, spending has increased considerably. Why? And then you want to add on top of that, well, why can't we get back to the spending that was? And I know you've been charged to make Loveland, the best, blah, blah, blah. But when we met with some board members, which was a wonderful meeting, we asked them about some very specific increase in expenditures, and they had no idea. They go, we never even saw that. So you're charged with making the district better, which to you may be spend a lot of money, but there's nobody watching what you're spending, from what I can see, because we've asked those questions and nobody had answers. Why did this go up so much? And they go, we didn't realize that.
No,
And there was an expense for board members and they didn't even know what it was. So I feel like
Some clarification about whether
I
your
feel like there's
superintendent's out of
nobody
control.
watching over the spending in the district, and then we're asking to give even more.
But don't you feel like some of that spending is addressed on this performance sheet here, this page number 5, talking
No,
about
some of it,
increases in
sure, yeah.
performance? Because I mean, I think there was a complaint at a certain point about district report cards and performance in the school, and so to fix that, some investments have to be made.
Not necessarily. The district report cards were hit hard because of opting out. Opting out did not need any more expenditures. Once they opted back in, those report cards should have gone up.
But I'm
So yes,
saying
some
if-
expenses should have been
yes,
incurred to
if all of
increase
these
report
things
cards, but
listed
not this
here
much.
feed into improving things in the school. So I mean, I think that does address some increases in
I'm not saying
spending.
they should be spending flat. I'm just saying it shouldn't have increased 13% in the last 2 years.
Well, but
And if it did, it needs to be explained.
What happened is we spent a certain period of time with no increases. And so, for example, in the areas of textbooks, there were no increases, and so then there's 1,000% increase. because then we were able to get back into, so there is.
Maybe there should have only been a 500% and you increase it a
Perhaps,
little
but-
bit, not all at once.
Or reduce it now.
All I'm saying is when you spend nothing, and then you begin to get back into what you're able to do, then you see some of those kinds of increases. I'm not saying that
Yeah,
explains
no, and you're right.
But if I could just say, I don't usually disagree with Amy, but I think there are some people who haven't had a chance perhaps to say a question that they had. So with the understanding that the board will not meet between now and December 3rd, it would seem to me if there are burning questions or important questions that people think didn't get addressed in the committee this evening, those questions could be submitted, perhaps in an email, and might help inform the scenarios that come back.
Sure.
Not with the understanding that those questions would all receive a written answer,
yeah.
because the board won't meet between now and then to come up with a board answer, but there may be a simple answer that could come from the treasurer, could come from the superintendent, or there may not be an answer, but it could be at the next meeting, then it could say, well, this question doesn't have an answer, this one will be addressed in this scenario, that kind of.
Well, and the only thing I wanted to add is there's really only literally one work day.
Right, no,
also
I
for
understand
us.
that.
So
I'm-
just
but
because-
we could still
Mhm.
record those questions, so as not to have
Oh,
people feel
sure.
like, no, don't
I
ask
just didn't want to
any
give the
more
impression that we were
questions,
going to be able to
move
work
forward.
on those and move
Yes.
those forward.
Over Thanksgiving dinner.
I wanted to throw out there too that I don't think Amy's spending is out of control, and I was one of the two who met with Juliet, and I think it's kind of unreasonable to expect us to know every single number, every single line, without going back and looking at it. So yes, there were times where I said I'm not sure, but I have to look into that, and I think that's quite reasonable as a board.
I would just like to add, as a parent that has two graduates and two still in the district, that I have seen firsthand the change, especially in the outcome called out in the 7 to 12 curriculum. I have four young men in my family that all, one is creative, one is very technical. They all have very different talents, and they have been given different opportunities. I watched in particular my son that's a freshman in college, who is more on the technical track. He's given a ton of additional classroom opportunities through there. So when I look at the outcomes, and then I look at the big expense categories in terms of, I know there was a decision by prior superintendent to try and go more all online instead of textbooks. So I do think there's the opportunity. I understand why there's some textbooks increased spending. I do think there's the opportunity to maybe flatten that out some. I think, but I am happy with the outcomes. I do think the special ed is one of those uncontrollable, like healthcare, that I would never want to turn away a special ed student. But those are two kind of uncontrollable expense categories that I think any business has, those uncontrollables, whether, in this it seems to be special ed and healthcare, and then there's obviously the whole funding. I do think we really do need to go back and look first, as everybody seems to be saying, at the non-personnel expenses and say, what can be removed? There are times when it makes sense to use a consultant versus hire a full-time employee that's on your books forever. If you're trying something new out, I do think sometimes it makes sense to try the consultant route before you hire an employee. So, but I would really like that burn down of non-staff, where are there opportunities? That we can look to say, hey, what can we remove as we go into the next school year, and then move forward. And then we have to make, and I think the creative ideas that Randy mentioned, those are the same things you make in business to say, hey, our company needs to do a reduction in force. The retirement strategy is one that you do with for-profit business. I think it makes sense. I don't know what the implications are for the school and what needs to be weighed out in that opportunity, but it's certainly exactly what you do with for-profit business. I think that's a great, suggestion that could help reduce expenses over time.
And I just want to build on that and say that, unless I read public sentiment wrong, my impression was that people were asking, why not more teachers, right? Aren't there more educators being added with this massive ask? So I say that, in support of, I'm not a teacher, but in support of the teachers to know that you are valued And for us as a group to remember that if we're gonna get the community behind this, we have to be mindful of what you just said, right? Like, where are the cuts gonna come?
You know, the message, I've been on the board for 8 years, the message for the last 4 to 6 years has been pretty clear. You know, the people who came in front of the board said, you have to do better. You have to do better at this, you have to do better. Our report card stinks, and I think they put it even more strongly in front of us. And then things happen out in the world. What are you doing about safety? You know, what are you doing about programming? Why don't we have these programs? These schools have these programs. So these are the people who came and spoke to us. And then, in fairness to Amy, the response from the board to her was, fix it. Okay? Now, I completely hear what you guys say, okay? We need to look at things. We need to look at how we fix it. Is there a way to fix it, and could we have done that better? And that's what we have to do as a community, right? But for you guys, my challenge for you and everybody in the community is what do you want the ultimate to be? Okay? Is that message still the same? Okay? I mean, we said we want all this stuff, right? I want this, but now I found out what it costs. Okay, maybe it costs that much, maybe it costs a little bit less. As a community, do we still want to spend that money to be what we said we wanted to be, or is it something a little less? And we have to make those decisions, you know? And as a board, we need to hear that from you, okay? This is not our school district, right? This is the community school district. We have to be told what you want this community, what this district needs, what you want this district.
But Art, I think that gets back to, we need the scenarios. I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
But when you turn it into practice, what does that mean?
Yep.
We're not gonna do this. Give us.
So, I mean, so if I'm hearing what I'm hearing, to me, it's a function of time. It's not gonna happen in a week, right?
I agree. Think there's any chance of
I'm hearing people loud and clear, I'm hearing what I'm hearing. So, but if we do take that longer time frame, we need to make sure we're clear on what we want when we start to figure out how to get there, right? That makes sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to hear, we need to see scenarios. I'm getting that out of everyone. We need to know what the trade-offs are going to be. I won't call them cuts, but the trade-offs are going to be. And a point I heard earlier, too, is, this can't be vague. No one wants anything vague. This has to be clearly defined. And I think it might have been you, John, who said, how are you going to sell this? It's like, no, we need to get to a point where we sell this. Because if we can't sell the people in here, then that's it. We can't sell the community. So we have to come to agreement on what this is going to be. To me, this has been, especially when it's gotten in and people have said what they really feel, right? This has been great. I do admit I was one of the people, I don't know every one of Kevin's rows in his spreadsheets after 2 years. So honestly, I don't. I will try to get better at that. But this is great, and if we can't define it so it's not vague, so it doesn't seem arbitrary, so we don't hit all the points that people can get behind, then we can't rush it. So that's where we have to be.
Quick question, it feels like we're wrapping up. I know Ben suggested next time we have beer.
Shout out
Have to find a different site.
Yeah.
Can't be on site.
All right.
Donate. The objectives as they're laid out in bullet point form are practically in order, right? The most important thing we have to decide, and I asked the board, and I will ask you all to agree, can we do March? And so hopefully, I'm all for, let's do a hand count, right? If you want, I think that's probably the best. Now, there's probably folks who would prefer not to vote in public. And I get that. So hopefully the dialogue led you closer to that answer, because we can't even talk about the feasibility of the millage and everything else until we decide. And I would offer, and I think you're right, Dr. Krauser, and I love the way that we took some of the themes and laid them out as potential potholes as we move forward. And scare tactics to me, and I know that was thrown around, and I know that that's very, it gets back, John, you've been very practical here, right? We got a hole in the budget, we got to fill it up. I don't need to be flippant about jobs. I came here because I want to pass a levy.
Yeah.
And I do not want
community that had two that failed in a row. And so I think everybody feels strongly about that. So then, to me, it feels, and it's a gut check. I would rather do it right and wait and potentially, as I said earlier, you're kicking the can down the road. I would rather do it right and wait, because the scare tactics in November don't mean anything if we don't pass it in March. So,
It gets worse.
yeah, and it is, it's a terrible thing. Nobody wants to go through that. And I'm sure I'm speaking for everybody here, besides the fact that we need to add beer to this March. I'm not going to I will have a beer in your honor March 3rd, or excuse me,
December 3rd.
But,
And you can have one on March 3rd, too.
Probably March 3rd.
But I think that, we just have to assess the practical nature. Can we turn this thing fast enough? And I will say again, I never had a lack of trust. I know that there are a lot of people in this room that worked hard and felt like they had the right answer this last time. And I'm not in any way dismissing that work, but the community spoke. So we gotta go back and grind the axe again, and it just feels like it's gonna be way too quick. But I'm here to pass this thing.
Me too. In fact, I voted against the last levy. I very, very, very much want to vote yes on the next one. I don't want to be a part of a community that doesn't pass levies. I want us to support our schools. Let's find a way.
I think that's most people. Most people feel that
I
way.
want to pass the levy.
What if we just took off the track and did the numbers again?
When we start talking about the master plan, we can do that. This is about operating.
Just saying.
I'll
That's what I
table
hear
that
at Kroger.
suggestion from when we come together for the master plan.
Right on your
We'll
post-it
get
note.
that one, the
Right.
first, it'll be the first one to
What,
receive
just
that.
take the scoreboard away, then what do I put?
Scoreboard again. Check.
Exactly.
Duly
Bullet
noted.
ties.
Yeah.
Got it.
So we're just gonna come together next week and see if the magic happens.
Christmas magic.
I don't know, Loveland during Christmas looks like a Lifetime movie.
One thing I just wanted to say though, as well, it's a practical thing, is if the consensus ultimately is moving on from March and going November, just realize that it doesn't mean that we still have 8 months to figure that out. I'm not trying to dissuade one way or the other. I'm just saying we're probably talking in March. I mean, the reality of this is if we are considering and really looking at potential cuts, these are people's lives. We want to give people as much heads up as possible. And I'm not saying cuts all means people. I'm just trying to bring that back to that piece of it. Is if some of the potential cuts in spending are actually jobs, we want to make sure you're giving them the find jobs or to help them find jobs. The reality still is there's still a lot of work to do if that's the case. And we're still looking at March. I would say end of March probably would be the right time to really come to some sort of an idea of what the next budget looks like if we're moving on from March and going to November.
What's the actual filing deadline?
The filing deadline for that is not until July.
Which we do not want to do.
No, we also want to get out and communicate as early as possible what we have here.
November.
Yeah.
Well, and as Mr. Bishop
why would
said,
they
there's
even
a lot
try?
of other
Because that's
work
what they did.
that needs to be done as well. It's not just,
They announced it the last
okay, we
week of
decide
July,
not to
which
do
is why.
March, maybe we're gonna do
No,
November.
they keep talking
So
about
we just
August
wait
or
till there's a
November.
filing deadline and we do that, but if there's a lot
August
of
for the-
other work
August
that
for
we
the
talked
November
about
levy, like
that
December
would
is for
help
the
us
March levy.
do better in
3
November
months
if we
before.
don't do March.
Do we know what this levy costs, to put together and run it? Like, what's it gonna cost
No.
your guys' resources to put something together and run it through March and it fail? Like, that's another thing. You have a
We-
campaign. Like, your guys' time.
We don't run it.
Well,
Campaign
your
runs it.
time,
No, I don't know.
You put a lot of time into it.
For us, it's our full-time job.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah,
I mean,
Yes.
I'm not being flip. I mean, that for us, that's what we,
60,000 in the yes campaign.
running a school district.
Opportunity cost. That's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
I mean, again, nothing was learned, I mean, it came about in July, exactly what the numbers were, it took 3 months for it to come back as a no, again, we'd only have 3 months to try to sell it in March, I do think we set ourselves up for failure. answer what needs to be
I still
answered to
think we
make
could
sure
do
the
it in
community
March. To me, it's
understands what
numbers.
they're signing
You just
up
make
for
cuts.
when
You
they
come down with a
fill
low
that
enough
out.
number, the community.
You know, one last comment is, I said at the last meeting,
Correct
this,
or March?
you know, obviously, we're sitting here talking about a levy, or levies. You know, this whole process is not just about a levy. You know, going forward, meetings together, learning sessions, just forget stuff, okay? Where the community is pulled in and gets involved. But I'll say it one more time, we can put all that stuff together, but people have to show up, people have to voice their opinions and all that. So this, again, we're sweating out a levy right now and numbers and things, but going forward as a district, we will strive to do better to make sure we're pulling people into things that are educational, okay? And hopefully by doing those things, we'll continue to build that trust. So if somewhere down the road we get into a similar situation, we already have that trust built up with each other, okay? And we don't have to go through the same process ever again, okay? All right. Is everybody good?
Yeah. We're very appreciative of everyone's time. Really, this is a lot of time, and your dedication to this is very appreciated.
Tom?
Not part of your immediate group, but looking around the table, I see a lot of parents. And there's some of us that are retired. We no longer have kids in school. So keep in mind, a lot of your no's that you received in this past levy were from people that don't have kids here in the school. We still support the schools, but I think because of the kind of loss that we're seeing throughout all school districts and such now, that we have to look forward to the future where we have some kind of change in how funds for schools are raised. This is a tremendous effort I'm seeing for just one operating levy, and I'm pretty sure the board and the whole district is thinking in terms of there's still two more coming up behind it somewhere. How are we gonna go through this again every time, every levy, every operating levy, every 3, 4, 5 years? I mean, this is a tremendous effort. We need to come up with a different way to fund schools.
Well, maybe out of this group, we can find a group of people who will work with our legislators and try to make a change. But it's something people have been wanting to do for like 25 years. Yes.
It's been ruled unconstitutional 3 times.
Split it another topic. It's a whole nother topic.
Build a prison and build land.
Yeah, pretty much.
3 times.
No, you're not allowed to.
Public school.
Throw some pot. All right, let's go.
Nope.
Okay. All right, let me-
You want to?
Motion to adjourn, please.
I didn't know we needed for this kind of meeting.
Yeah,
I
we're
didn't
the
think it was
budget board meeting.
official.
It's gonna be a slog.
Aye.
Hypothetically, I think this
Thank you.
Adjourn 9:22.
No, seriously, because this is a nice table. I feel like
And it's
it's a
like a
$200 table. And I see.
Oh, I bet it's.
That is $4,000.
Next Tuesday. Oh, look at that.
0.04 mils.
I think people are going to be absolutely shocked. About 83% of your budget is people.
Somebody with a mix I've gotten raises. Well, my actual take home today is smaller than I was. And if I compensation, just reduction actual physical dollars. And so that the taxes keep going up when the paycheck